Hey everyone, welcome back to the MilVet Podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Aronson, and today I'm joined by Frank Baumann and Boe Nankivel. Frank and Boe are operating partners at Boe Capital, which is a veteran-founded lower middle market private equity fund. Today we're going to be talking about private equity ops, operating partner roles, and why veterans should consider this career path. But before we dive in, I'd like to invite you to like, subscribe, and share the podcast with a friend. Frank and Boe, thank you guys so much for joining me today.
It's our pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Awesome. I've given a 30,000 foot overview of your background. I've really just given your title, so no details at all, but it's always really great to hear it in the first person. So can you guys take a few minutes to tell us about yourselves and how you wound up in the seat that you're in today? Maybe we can start with you, Frank, and then kick it over to Boe.
Yeah, happy to take you through a walk in the life of Frank Baumann. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Went to LSU for undergrad, dabbled a little bit in commercial banking out of LSU as I had a degree in finance. I knew, however, I wanted to join the Navy when I was still in school. So only spent a year in commercial banking, enlisted in 2007, and then got out in 2015. 8 years, about half of which was as an enlisted intelligence specialist, and the other half was as an intelligence officer. So, transitioned in 2015 into a sales role because honestly didn't really know what I wanted to do when I was growing up as a second career. Decided to take a sales role, concurrently work on an MBA, and then lo and behold, found Boe Capital back in 2018, and I have been on board ever since.
Yeah, so again, thanks for having us on today. My name's Boe, grew up in Montana. I was actually born in South Dakota, but most of my young life was in Montana. Always kind of ran around the woods playing Army, so was very attracted to the military. Joined the Navy in 1999 and made my way over to rigorous BUDS training in 2001. I was actually just finishing first phase of BUDS when the towers fell. So that timing is either good or bad, depending on how you look at it. But got to live my dream job, basically, for most of my adult life. And around 2020, I had worked with the managing partner, Sergio Zapata, at Boe. I'd worked with him in a platoon years and years ago, and he had told me he's starting Boe Capital, which he started in 2017. And was like, hey, when are you going to hang up your spurs and come work for me? And so after I had basically met all my career goals, I put in my application, did a couple in-person or phone interviews, then some in-person interviews, and then went and observed a board meeting and was very, very attracted to the ops side of private equity. And I think it's a very good transition for veterans, specifically on the ops side of private equity. So that's kind of how I got started in Boe. I came over officially in 2022, so pretty recent.
That's awesome. Always really awkward to hear, but thank you guys both for your service. I want to talk a little bit. Oh yeah, it's a privilege.
Thank you for yours.
Sweet. Before this turns into a meeting of the Mutual Admiration Society, I want to learn more about Boe. Can you guys tell me a little bit about Boe? What is it? What's the thesis? It's been around for, it sounds like 7 years, if I did that math right, since 2017, correct?
That's right. Yep.
Cool. Math for Marines. Good to see that checks out. Tell me a little bit about Boe. Frank, maybe we can start with you, and then Boe, you can add anything that Frank might miss.
Yeah, so Sergio, as Boe mentioned, founded and started Boe back in 2017. First fund, relatively small fund. Sergio had been coming from middle market private equity shops and saw a hole essentially in how operations were conducted within private equity funds. So 2017, he starts it. 2018, Q1-ish of 2018, first acquisition. So that first fund was really just one platform company focused in specialty pharmaceuticals. And then we've gone into fund 2 and are starting fund 3 now. the main thesis behind Cold War Capital is not totally dissimilar from traditional lower middle market private equity shops in that, buy and build is the main general strategy to execute capital deployment and drive returns for our investors. But the differentiation is we heavily focus on human capital execution. And so in that, the gap that Sergio saw was, look, these acquisitions are being made, and oftentimes you got wrong people, wrong seats, etc. The folks that are employed directly by the private equity firms, typically deal team or investment team folks, are managing the business by virtue of a spreadsheet. That's not necessarily a great term, but that's typically how it's traditionally been done. And didn't really have the influence or the human capital resources to deploy and impact operations and therefore financial performance within their portfolio companies. Sergio, coming from a Navy SEAL or special operations background, obviously highly valued those people with similar backgrounds, their ability to go into industry agnostic, expertise agnostic, go into those environments quickly, shorten the learning curve, and be able to just get things done at the end of the day. And that can range from nitty gritty project management, special project execution on the ground, all the way up to, upper executive management type roles where you're more strategizing and executing at a strategic or down in, for military folks, strategic down into a little bit of the operational level, less tactical. So that's the big thesis is we believe that folks that come from military backgrounds, specifically special operations or support to special operations, fighter pilots, etc., can easily transition those soft skills or those traits and be trained for skills in order to execute regardless of what industry you're talking about.
That's awesome. Bo, anything that you would add for a description of Cold Bore? And if not, I have another question flip over your way.
I think it's important to add that just along the same lines as Frank was discussing, I think hiring veterans in operations positions gives you a little bit more flexibility in selecting the right leadership teams at those portfolio companies. And what I mean by that is it's very easy to screen leadership candidates for business acumen, business experience. A lot harder to screen for leadership traits, grit, loyalty, character. So if you take veterans who are known entities on the leadership, grit, loyalty, character, you can train them to fit any industry. And it buys you a little more time because you have that known entity in those positions. Now you have a little bit more time to hire the GM or the executive chair or the CEO of that portfolio company because you have a known entity that can block and tackle on the leadership. So I think that's another big differentiator for Cold Bore is putting veterans in those right seat, left seat positions of leadership in the portfolio companies to make sure you have the right leaders in place and they're actually executing the plan.
Got it. Yeah, I would say that that's a feature that a lot of our clients share as well, right? They've got this belief that it's easier to teach someone a new industry than it is to teach someone from an industry how to be a good leader, right? I want to ask Bo, since you're a little closer to the transition out of the uniform, obviously part of the thesis of Cold Bore is that you guys can take folks coming out of the military, plug them into these portfolio companies, and they'll deliver outsized returns. I want to ask about your own transition. How's it been getting into the seat? Jumping straight into a private equity shop, I think, can be a little bit intimidating to some folks. You're a Navy SEAL, so I'm assuming you're not as intimidated by it. But what's it been like, from day one until today, in terms of like your own learning, growth, development, and how you feel like you've added to the team?
I don't think intimidated is the right term, but I would say humbling. I think it was humbling transitioning.
Yeah.
I finished my career as the 18th Command Master Chief at SEAL Team 3, so I ran a whole SEAL team, and then now I'm the low man on the totem pole at a private equity firm. However,
Yeah.
the guys that I get to work with are unbelievably good. So I can phone a friend whenever I want if I'm running into any issues. But on the same hand, if you look at why guys are attracted to doing special ops, they like high risk, high reward, highly dynamic environments. They find that stuff challenging and fun, vice intimidating. And that is, there's a lot of parallels in private equity where it's high risk, high reward, it's dynamic environments. So I think for me in particular, the transition was about as smooth as you can have one. I went from one dynamic, high risk environment, high risk, high reward to another one. So I thought it was a very healthy transition for me. If I'm gonna have to hang up my spurs, then this was like probably the best transition I could have hoped for.
Next best thing. Frank, I want to ask, maybe it might be helpful for folks that are listening who are just transitioning out. We had, before we dove into the episode, we had like a little back and forth about my own transition out. I make this joke all the time. I couldn't even spell revenue, and so I don't want to take anything for granted from our audience who might not be as familiar with private equity. And if you're listening to this, I encourage you to take notes for terms that you don't know, you don't understand. Look them up after the show. That's always something I advise, especially in finance, because some of the terminology can be fairly dense. But Frank, I want to ask, just like, if I don't know anything about private equity, I don't know anything about a fund, what is private equity? Like, what business are you guys in? How does it work? How do you guys make money? Can you just explain a little bit about the business model before we continue the conversation?
Yeah, for sure. So, private equity is typically, a firm will go out and raise money. They'll raise funds, traditionally in a specific fund. So you'll typically hear, hey, we're in fund 1, fund 2, fund 3, so on and so forth. And so within that fund, they're deploying that money or capital. So when you hear capital, that's money, into usually acquisitions for either majority or wholly owned positions in existing companies. That's typically what private equity does. And as I mentioned earlier, buy and build is a common, general strategy that private equity firms will employ. And so what that means is you'll go buy what they consider an anchor acquisition, meaning that's usually the biggest one that you'll make. And then throughout the hold period, which is the time in which the private equity fund is owning that investment, they will buy other acquisitions and bolt them on to that first acquisition. Those are called add-ons typically. And so how does a private equity firm make money? Well, we're using other people's money at the end of the day, right? Our investors. And so a typical fund structure agreement is, hey, we're going to give you a return on investment, no promises, right? Investments can go south sometimes, but typically it's, hey, we're going to take, a commission on 20% of the returns or something along those lines. So we only really get paid, aside from some fees, etc., if we return capital to our investors, particularly above a certain threshold that we set in agreement with our investors. And so how do you make money on an investment in the private equity space? You sell it for more than what you paid for it. It's just like a stock at the end of the day. The ability to grow it and sell it for more, there's a few things that go into it at the end of the day. So we measure everything in terms of valuing a company on mainly one financial metric, and that's EBITDA. And for those that are just learning or wanting to learn, that's earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's a surrogate for how much cash a company can produce. there's debate on whether or not that's a good measure for how much cash a company produces. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime sidekick, hates that measure, but hey, that's what's accepted in the industry as the prominent measure for valuing a company. So the first step is you want to grow EBITDA over your hold period. The second step is, I talked about valuing. There's a multiple tied to EBITDA. So how much is a company worth? It's worth however much the multiple is times the EBITDA of the company. If you can grow that multiple through different levers versus the multiple you paid for it, that's another way to grow the overall value and make money for your investors and therefore the firm. It gets more complicated than that, but that's the general way that we make money for the firm as well as our investors.
I mean, it's like a master class. I should get a refund from my MBA program because, it's like the clearest, most succinct description of it. For those that are listening to the show, instead of like watching it on YouTube, something like that, you probably didn't hear Boe kind of like chuckling a little bit when he was when Frank was describing entering the business, improving it over time, and then exiting it. It's like yada yadaing over a lot, right? The operational improvement of these businesses is like, it's no small feat. And that's where
fun stuff. That's the fun stuff, though.
It is the fun stuff. I think it's fascinating. I think it's the kind of thing you can spend a whole career studying it and still come up with new ways to skin cats. I think it's super interesting. It's fun. I think it plays to a lot of our strengths. And that's where we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about today, given the nature of your guys' roles at the private equity fund. Maybe I could add just a little bit of color at the fund. The things that are necessary to make a fund work: you have to be able to raise the capital. You have to have investors that are picking the right deals and getting into those deals at the right multiples. And then the operational improvement, which again is where you guys focus. Would you say that that's an accurate summary of like, these are the different trees to be chopped at the fund?
Yep. That is 100% the main pillars that you got to do. Yep.
And so I want to ask a little bit about like, what kinds of businesses are you guys looking at? And one of the reasons I'm asking, I work at a venture fund called Context Ventures. We invest in military veteran entrepreneurs. We do seed and pre-seed checks. We look at very different businesses than a private equity investor might. Some of the investing style is very different, right? You mentioned in your intro that you guys are looking for control positions. You're at least going to have a majority position. You want to control the board so that you can make whatever operational improvements you want to make, which is very different than how a venture investor will make a minority investment. They're along for the ride, for better or worse, right? So, and the types of businesses, because of the risk profiles of these different funds, are also very different. And so I want to ask, what kinds of businesses do you guys look at? What kind of businesses align with the private equity model? Boe, Frank, over to either of you two guys that would like to chime in.
Yeah, high level, when we look at industries, we have a few criteria that we look at to really filter down into, either sub-industries, sectors, et cetera. One is, are they recession resilient? Okay. Nothing is recession proof, for the most part. But are they recession resilient? Meaning, hey, do they have a high concentration of non-discretionary revenue, meaning the consumer or their customers? This is non-discretionary spend, so we will still see decent revenue levels, regardless of economic headwinds. And then really, how many businesses are out there of this type? Meaning, what's the level of fragmentation? You'll hear that a lot, a highly fragmented industry. And that just means, hey, there's not just a few companies out there that own the preponderance of the total addressable market within the United States. There's a lot of mom and pops or founder owned or small businesses that either dominate a city, a region, et cetera. And maybe there's a few strategic, meaning big level companies, often publicly traded within that space. And then lastly, we really like B2B businesses. And, for those that have a hard time conceptualizing B2B, I'll be more specific. This company does businesses primarily with other companies and not individual consumers. And to further go along with that, we really like where those businesses are, the majority of their costs are tied to a human being, their labor, not high capital expenditure, producing widgets, that type of thing, more of the professional services or some type of business to business service that's being provided as opposed to products. That's high level of what we like to look at.
Super cool. Yeah, I mean, you already double clicked on a bunch of my follow-up questions. We've talked about your guys' role at the fund is creating value from the portfolio companies, helping them improve over time. What levers do you guys think about pulling? So if we made a new acquisition today, Bo, what are some of the first things that come to your mind when you are, and you can rewind us back to the due diligence process if you prefer, or we can start from like, hey, we just acquired this asset. How are we going to get in there and make it better?
That's probably a better question for Frank with his experience.
Yeah, and I'll kind of start from cradle to grave, so to speak. I will rewind back to the due diligence process. When we look at an individual target, we have our own standard way of how we go about doing due diligence and how is this going, this investment, if we make it, you'll hear this word a lot. How is it going to be accretive to this overall investment? Meaning, how is it going to improve the value of the overall investment? So from the operations side, I won't necessarily hit on the financial, how this cost basis is a value driver and accretive, more on the operational side. Every business you look at, for the most part, at least at our level in the lower middle market, where EBITDA sometimes is some sub 1 million, all the way up to potentially 5 million of what we look at in terms of acquiring, which that is, for those listening, not a lot of money in the grand space of private equity. Those are small companies. And so there's always going to be opportunities, is what I like to call them, to improve the business. Whether that's something that hits the P&L, meaning a financial improvement, or a managerial improvement, or a business process improvement. So the levers we're looking at in due diligence hit those things. Are there business processes that need to be improved? And when I talk about business processes, what's their meeting cadence? How often are the managers going all the way down to front level folks? How are they incentivizing their folks to perform? How are they measuring performance of individuals in the overall business and all those things? And what's the cadence at which they're doing it? There's always holes. Typically, small businesses don't know how they're going to perform until they close the books, 15 days to 20 days after the month is done. That's bad for us. We want to know, and that's bad for decision making. The quicker people listening it may resonate with them or not, OODA loops, right? How long is the OODA loop to make a decision and act? The longer that is, the longer it's going to take to improve what's going wrong. So there's always opportunities for us to shorten those OODA loops with every company that we buy. And we're there to assist them in doing that. And oftentimes technology is a solution to do that. And then obviously another big lever is, hey, are their costs too high? Why are their costs too high? If we bring them into the fold, is there economies of scale where we can leverage with purchasing power, et cetera, to reduce their overall cost to the business? And therefore, there's going to be value add. So that's the front end. Once we get married with that company and buy them, now it's where the rubber meets the road. That's where we have to start confirming what we thought when we only got to kind of date them before we married them. And you don't always reveal everything when you date somebody. But once you tie the knot, you start, all the skeletons come out of the closet, or you get more detail into what you've gotten yourself into. And so there's typically a 90 to 180 day post-marriage, post-acquisition period. You're doing things that you normally would do to integrate the company, bring them on the same payroll, financial systems, all that. But then you're also learning more about their business processes, et cetera. And so once you do that confirmation after 90 days, then you got to prioritize with limited resources. What are you going to get done and by when? And so those levers are typically, general levers to improve performance on an operational level when it comes to the profit and loss statement is how can we grow top line? Are there opportunities for us to grow revenue? Our gross margins, okay, what impacts gross margins? Is overtime through the roof and therefore driving up our costs and therefore deteriorating gross margins? And so we'll put a plan into place to pull that lever. How can we improve these things? And those are real dollars. Those can have a big impact to growing the company without even adding another dollar of revenue. And then some of the things I talked about that we do in due diligence, they're typically, particularly if you've gotten the platform investment to a certain scale, some big opportunities for economies of scale, things with insurances, any type of supplier relationship you have, you typically can drive down unit costs by partnering with the right folks and negotiating. Hey, we're bringing you more business. How can we renegotiate and drive down costs? So it sounds relatively easy when you generalize it. Consensus building and getting everybody on the same page is often the hardest part. So there's a lot of that from an operating partner role. You've got to wear two hats as an operating partner. I'm employed by the firm, by the PE fund that's paying my paycheck, but I also have a sense of loyalty to the portfolio company I'm working for, because ultimately my second boss is that CEO. And so that consensus building to trug along these operational improvement projects, that's another part that you have to do. But we focus on non-financial levers to drive value, operational levers, revenue and costs. That's our big focus area.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it does sound easy. It's like, yeah, just grow revenue, cut costs. It's like, but it is really complicated. I mean, building a company is hard. A lot of the founders that I'm assuming you guys are buying companies from are amazing human beings, right? Like they've built these incredible businesses. I'm guessing a lot of them kind of have like a sales kind of personality, because that's typically what it takes to go from 0 to 1 is you got to be able to sell, right? And so improving those operational processes, finding opportunities to improve the margins of the business, cut costs, and figure out how you can sell more effectively. Those things are really complicated. They're difficult and they take time. They do not happen overnight. So it's certainly a tricky job. One thing you mentioned earlier in the conversation was right person, right seat. RPRS, that's a big one. It's from the book Traction. I'm assuming that's kind of where you guys pulled it from. Big fan of that book. If you're interested in like how, I know that there are a lot of private equity shops that think of that as like a playbook for installing an SOP in a business. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that means? Like, what does it mean when you say right person, right seat is important? One of the levers that you described a bunch of them: financial improvement, process improvement, leadership improvement, and then costs. I assume that right person, right seat is sort of that leadership bucket, but that it influences all of them. Tell me a little bit about how you guys think about that. And then I'm not going to ask you for examples. Obviously, might be like sensitive to talk about portfolio companies, but would be just curious to hear any additional color that you have to add on your experience on how important putting the right person into the right seat can be. Over to either of you guys.
So I think every business often struggles with right person, right seat. And what I mean by that is the right person with the right skill sets, attitude, cultural alignment, etc., sitting in the right position within the organization to execute what ultimately the CEO or their manager has empowered them to execute upon. And oftentimes they are incentivized, whether it's through base salary or some sort of bonus. And if you're in a PE-owned company, sometimes some sort of equity-like vehicle that you could cash out on an exit is tied to. And it doesn't mean that if it's the wrong person in the wrong seat, that they're not the right person for another seat within the organization. So I don't want people to take away like, hey, we assess this person, they're fired, they're gone. That's not how it works most of the time. Um, and sometimes before we make those decisions, hey, do we need to put this person somewhere else within the organization, or cut ties altogether and get the right person? We will exhaust the efforts of ensuring that person or those people have the right resources to do what we've asked them to do. Because and Boe can elaborate upon this concept that every CBC employee, particularly operating partners, take to heart, and that's servant leadership. You're not being a good servant leader if you're asking someone to do something and you haven't provided them with every possible resource they need to be successful. And so, we exhaust those efforts. And you mentioned traction, right? Multiple of our portfolio companies, either today or in the past, have implemented EOS, which is, traction, as their managerial system, so to speak, that they use to run their organizations. And if our portcos don't have that, it's some similar type of managerial system. So all of that is, accountability at the end of the day, ensuring everybody is aligned in terms of the direction the boat is being rowed, and what the overall organization's goals are, and how does my team play a role in that, and how does my specific role within that team, within that organization, play a role. So right person, right seat is very important, particularly if you're trying to meet timelines. And I say, hey, we don't make the quick decision to get rid of someone, but we also don't want to take too long at the same time. So how do we go about doing that? It's ensuring everybody knows their goals, how they're going to be supported, all that stuff. And EOS is a great tool to do that. That for those that are interested in traction, they do things like set quarterly rocks. They call them rocks. You can think of those as just objectives or goals, and they should be measurable at the end of the day, right? We want to ensure that we can objectively measure how someone is performing at the end of the day, and that doesn't exclude us either, right? Operating partners have measurable objectives or rocks at the end of the day, and so does our firm. So I hope that answers your question, but that's kind of a deeper layer into left seat, right seat. Boe, I don't know if you want to elaborate on the servant leadership aspect of that, but I know you can do a much better job than I can.
I think this particular audience is probably familiar with servant leadership, but I guess the way I look at it is to use when I was the command master chief of a SEAL team as an example. I didn't have 300 people working for me. I had worked for 300 people. So when we make these acquisitions, when we go to these portfolio companies, you kind of need to go see who's actually doing the work and ensuring that they have all the resources they need to be successful. So it's not just the management teams. It's not just the CEO. It's the actual who's actually doing the work, and do they have everything they need? To your point earlier about a lot of these owners of these small companies that we buy have a sales background because they were getting it from 0 to 1. And when we come in, we're not shaking everything up and turning everything upside down. It's more like, hey, if you're more comfortable doing sales, hey, let us take this back accounting off your plate. Let us take this HR off your plate and let them do the stuff that they actually enjoy doing. And in most cases, that works out very, very well, where we can integrate a company into the larger portfolio company. Just, a lot of cases, these small companies are using like QuickBooks, which, we gotta get them off of that. There's a lot of synergies and support that we can offer getting these companies into the 21st century. Because I'm sure if the audience isn't completely tracking, Coldboard Capital is micro cap, lower market PE firm. To give some color, Sergio came from a middle market to upper middle market background in private equity, where those deals are, north of 50 million, 100 million EBITDA deals, where most of the capital in the market is chasing those size deals. So consequently, those deals are priced to perfection. And half the time, if you win the deal, you kind of feel bad because you overpaid. So Sergio saw an opportunity. Well, what if we go downstream from that? We'll look at what these larger middle market firms are going for multiple wise, and then we'll build from a micro cap, 500,000, 1 million, 5 million EBITDA, start there. We'll build it into that feeding frenzy where all those deals are priced to perfection and take advantage of those multiples. So that's one of the ways we do it. But if you think about what's going on in those small companies that are probably on QuickBooks and they don't have a whole lot of SOPs, that takes a lot of operational pull, which is why Colbor has a larger operating partner pool than most PE firms, because we're having to come in, and I guess one of the partners says it best: we buy small business risk and we sell middle market simplicity. But that takes a lot of operational work to do that, which is why our operating partner pool is a little bit bigger than most PE firms, because it's not easy, and it does take time. And you're pulling them up into the 21st century. These are in many cases businesses where dads run the business for 30 years and Bo doesn't want to take over the business. He wants to go do something else. So they have no succession plan. So that's where we can come in and help them pull their business up into the 21st.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, you guys are like, I'm familiar with this segment of the market, given that I run a company that's in this segment of the market. So it's like, I'm like, hearing you guys describe this, and I'm like, yep, that sounds familiar. I would say one place that we have been, I guess, fortunate is that because we operate in the human capital space, I think about right person, right seat constantly, like all the time. And of course, like our clients do too, right? Like that's why they come to us, is to get an advantage when it comes to building a team. And so that right person, right seat can it's just such a big difference. Like, we brought on a chief operating officer who we'll have on the podcast, in the coming weeks, named Jim Lose, who's been placing veterans into jobs for like 25 years. I mean, he is the OG in the space. He's actually the best in the business at what he does. Like he is the best in the world at this particular skill set. And having him as a COO has made an unbelievable impact in a really short amount of time, like in a quarter. You can see our processes look night and day better than what they looked like at the beginning of, in the middle of the summer when he joined us. So that concept of right person, right seat is one that I think about all the time. I wanted to provide just one additional piece of intel, or if you're looking to learn more about what we're talking about with regards to Traction and EOS, which is the entrepreneurial operating system that's described in the book Traction, would encourage you to check that book out. I always think of Traction sort of as like a reference material, or like almost like the encyclopedia. It's like on the desk, but I'm not reading it as I would, a normal book, which is to say listening to it, because I'm a Marine. But appreciate the kind chuckle. That was not very funny. But if you're a Marine who can barely read and you're looking to access this book, I would recommend the book Get a Grip. It's another book that is also by Gino Wickman, the same author, and it's like a first-person account of implementing the system. I found it really interesting, super helpful, and much more approachable than the book Traction. So I would encourage folks to take a look at that. I want to ask you guys a little bit more about these operational challenges that you guys are seeing, or opportunities rather. What kinds of opportunities do you guys see? What do you like to work on? What really excites you guys? Like if you're coming into a new portco, like what are the most exciting pieces of the puzzle? I imagine for some folks, it's like, hey, how can we improve this sales process? That's where I get like really fired up. Is like, hey, let's build some systems here. Let's get these folks on a CRM, and we're going to have an outsized impact on the same amount of work. And for other folks, it might be thinking about supply chain type stuff, or how we can have synergies across businesses when we hit a certain scale. But just kind of curious for a personal opinion from you guys on what types of operational opportunities, not challenges, do you guys find most interesting to work on? Because I imagine you're working on a lot of different types of things.
Yeah. The first example you just gave is a big one. Most of these companies, we're lucky if the companies are operating on an ERP. For those that don't know an ERP, I think it stands for like Enterprise Reporting I forget the full acronym, but it's basically the piece of software. It's a system they use to basically run their business. So think of like scheduling, purchase orders, things of that nature, things that are coming into the business. That's what they run their business off of. Oftentimes they don't have one, or they're in an outdated one, and they don't know how to fully utilize it in terms of extracting important information of KPIs, key performance indicators of what's truly driving the performance of the business. Almost every time. They're tracking KPIs, but they're very, very manual. They're in a Excel spreadsheet that's been manually updated over time, or they're in Google Sheets or whatever Google's thing is, which, hey, I'm going to hate on Google Sheets for a minute. It's terrible. But anyway, that is low-hanging fruit for us, but I love it. And the reason I love it, first of all, we employ a rather robust data, IT, BI team within the operating partners group. I'm going to give a shout out to Craig Lathrop and his team. They are by far the best professional coders and everything in terms of bringing these small businesses into a sophisticated level of BI intelligence. So we are able to get up and running. It depends on the company, but from day zero, within 3 to 6 months of getting near real-time insights into the business when they get their hands on these businesses. And it's low-hanging fruit for us. It's hard work. Everybody's working hard, but it's almost step one from our playbook in order to start extracting data out of this business to fully understand the performance. And the reason I love it is almost every acquisition we have the opportunity to do it. And two, the seller and his or her management teams, when they start seeing what data can do and to inform their decisions, the light bulb goes off like that. And so not only are you bringing this small company up to speed and further sophisticating them, you're making those managers, that management team, and all the way down to frontline management and even sometimes frontline workers, way more efficient at their ability to be effective in their jobs, in executing and making decisions. Oftentimes, they would have never realized what was in the realm of possibility with just a little investment into software. And we're happy to help make that investment once we bring them on board. That is, for me, the thing I look forward to the most with most of our acquisitions.
And for me, I really enjoy going on the ground and working with employees that are actually doing the work. So that's my favorite thing to do. Basically, I ask a lot of stupid questions. Mm-hmm. What time do you come to work? Then what do you do? Can I go on a delivery route with you? And you kind of figure out through asking them like what resources they need and what resources that they don't need. Are they getting the right resources at the right time? And in many instances, there's a disconnect sometimes between the people that are actually doing the work and upper management, where, for one example, guys were coming to work at 8 a.m, but they weren't allowed to do anything till 8:30. And it's like, well, why do you come in at 8? And it's like, well, it's because Steve said I need to be here at 8. And then you talk to Steve and he's like, oh, I meant that in passing. That's not, they can come in at 8:30. Little things like that, you'd be very surprised. You can make some pretty big changes with the way an organization is run just by going to work with the guys for a week and figuring out efficiencies that can be gained. And if you're asking those questions, you're kind of leading them along to the right answer as you go. And there you get some of your buy-in. So that's my favorite thing to do, is to go on the ground, actually see what the guys are actually doing and is it the most efficient. And in many cases, like Frank alluded to, if they are tracking data, oftentimes it's the wrong data, or they're looking at the wrong KPIs. They're measuring stuff that does not move the needle whatsoever on the business. And you're trying to make decisions off of the wrong information. So in many cases, go in there, see how the business is actually run on the ground by the people that are doing the work, and then starting to make positive change there, making their life easier, making the business more efficient. People, process, technology. You can't get to the process part until you get the buy-in from the people.
Yeah. Bo, it sounds like you're a champion of customer discovery, since your customer is, of course, the business that you're improving. It's like, roll up your sleeves, go for a ride along. It makes a ton of sense. I'm not sure that it's necessarily something that everybody from like financial services would think about, but it does make a ton of sense. Like, right, like see how folks are spending their time and where there's low hanging fruit. Frank, I was laughing when you were describing how small companies manage their data. I honestly feel like it's probably one of the biggest challenges. I've been an entrepreneur for 5 years now, and I think it's one of the biggest challenges I've faced in every business that I've been a part of or even seen from an investor perspective, is how they manage data. How do they link up these different systems? And then like, where is your source of truth? Right.
Yep.
You can just for a personal example, for our business, we have HubSpot for a CRM. We've got a separate applicant tracking system where we're tracking individual deals that we're doing to make sure that we're, maximizing our probability of putting the right person into the right seat. We've got our accounting system, which measures our finance. We've got a separate thing for projections. We've got our knowledge base, which is a Notion. So there's data lives in these different places, and it's really tricky to figure out, where can I pipe it all into? How can I do that? And is that even the highest priority for me, building, from 0 to 1, scaling from 1 million to 3 million a year your biggest priority is probably sales. But to get to that next level, to get to 10 million to $20 million, you're going to need these systems that scale, and you're going to need to be able to make data informed decisions. So,
and that's the beauty of the operations group that we have at Coldboard, is you're talking about, where is my priority as a business owner, right? That you're talking from your seat. Well, we're a resource here to help, right? We'll worry about this, you worry about that. So we're more than happy to take that stuff off the plate and off their plate. And at the end of the day, if we accomplish it, it's only going to make them more effective in doing what they want to focus on. So that's the beauty, at least within private equity. If you partner or sell to the right firm that's aligned that way, you can hit your individual goals, the organization's goals, and at the end of the day, if you're incentivized correctly, your own personal financial goals. It is a balancing act, to your point. Even with an operations group resource, there's got to be prioritization. There's not unlimited resources in terms of time or people, and certainly financial resources are always limited. So prioritization is king when it comes to moving the needle, so to speak. You got to figure that out for sure.
Yep. Guys, I want to bring the conversation home by asking 2 final questions. The first one is, I would just love to hear any general career advice that you'd have for transitioning veterans who are thinking about what's next for them. You can take it as broadly as, hey, here's just generalizable advice. You can also take the question in the direction of, for folks that are interested in private equity ops. It's really up to you guys. What advice would you have for any transitioning veterans who are listening to the show today?
So for me, I would say for veterans, if you're in the military, the 3 of us can have a pretty detailed discussion on any number of topics, but use a ton of acronyms. It's a whole another language of the military. That's the same thing with finance, PE, VC, entrepreneurship. You just need to learn the lingo. So it's a language, and I don't know if they make the language complex so that people are scared to go into PE and VC and entrepreneurship, but it's just a language. And once you learn the language and you start understanding these terms, it makes the transition so much easier. So if I had any advice to give people, take some finance classes. If you're in watching the news and you hear some terms, ERP, EBITDA, all those types of terms. If you don't know what those are, then just look them up quick. It takes 2 seconds, because the language is probably 70% of the task of just learning how to speak that language so you can have an articulate, intelligent conversation and make good decisions based on knowing exactly what all those terms mean and how they interact with each other. So that'd be my biggest advice.
Yeah, as I think back on my transition, I would say the earlier you start to think about your transition, the better. I really, as an officer, I had to submit a resignation, which I think the rules were it had to be, no less than 12 months out. And so I thought I had a ton of time. And so what do you do when you think you have a ton of time? You procrastinate, and it creeps up on you real quick. So, the earlier you start, the better, and really take that time to think about what it is you want to do. Maybe not from a functional, actual day-to-day perspective, or job title perspective, but also think about what type of team and culture do you want to join, right? I don't have any stats on this, but it was once told me, hey, post-transition, and those that are just listening aren't going to really see the visual, but the number of job hops that happens early post-transition of a military veteran is high. And then eventually that tenure at an organization gets longer and longer and longer as they are, longer they are away from their transition. And oftentimes it's not necessarily because they didn't find the right functional role from a day-to-day perspective, but really the culture, they're missing something that they probably enjoyed for so many years being part of the military. So finding those things that have been important to you within the military, outside of a functional role, is a big piece of figuring out your transition. And now, if it's specific to private equity or something in investment banking or the financial sector that you're interested in, Bo hit it on the head. Take some finance courses or educate yourself. Almost everybody transitioning out has the benefit of GI Bill, and hardly anybody actually uses it. And then you also have, some schools for military veterans will provide you incremental financial assistance on top of the GI Bill. So if you don't have your undergrad, get an undergrad and leverage electives, et cetera, to educate yourself. If you have an undergrad, get a graduate degree, an MBA. That's what I did. That's what Bo's doing right now. 2023 is the last published statistics on GI Bill utilization. 2023 is the lowest number dating back to 2012. So fewer and fewer people are leveraging these benefits. And, look, it's great educations for free or little money at the end of the day. And not only will that further educate you on certain things, but it's going to strengthen your network. You have a great network right now within the military and folks that have already transitioned. You can further that network by expanding it within a college or university, either at the undergraduate or postgraduate levels. And then also, partner. There's also a bunch of organizations, yours included, that are a resource to help you, whether that's to place you in a job or educate you on what's out there. Most people that are listening to this, most military veterans, do not like to ask for help, right? I think it's very, very important at this point in your professional careers and your lives to step out of that comfort zone of not wanting to ask for help, to say, hey, I need help. I don't know what I don't know, and I really, really want to transition successfully. And so seek those resources out. Do yourself a favor. Call up friends you only keep in touch with once a year that have transitioned out, or you haven't talked to since they left the military, and get their advice. They're going to be happy to do it. I wish I had done more of that back in 2014, 2015. And it took getting in a job I didn't like into a culture I didn't like to start picking up the phone to do that. So that would be my advice.
It's like a masterclass. I mean, really, like, yeah, 100% agree with everything that you said. If you're interested in going back to school, I do recommend folks check out a nonprofit called Service to School. It's a nonprofit that we've supported for a really long time. We donate 1% of our revenue to veteran serving nonprofits, and that's one that we love to support. So check out Service, the number 2, and then school.org. Frank, Boe, thank you guys so much for joining us on the podcast today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're incredibly busy. I want to ask, how can folks find out more and support your guys' business?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a website. Just Google Cold Bore Capital. You can find me on LinkedIn. If anybody's listening and you want a one-on-one point of contact to learn more specifically about Cold Bore or specifically about the day in the life of an operating partner, what we do, or honestly, other firms or opportunities to get into entrepreneurship, etc. We've partnered with some great organizations and have those resources. So really, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn and hit me up directly if you want those one-on-one connections.
Awesome.
Yep, and I'm also on LinkedIn. And a cool thing on our website, if you just go to coldborecapital.com, is there's a number of videos on there that our strategic marketing and communications team have put together that are, in my opinion, very, very good and worth your time. Basically, just kind of going through how Cold Bore works, how we look at things through different lenses and perspectives, deals and everything else. So those videos are on there. They're all very short, very professional, but worth your time, in my opinion. But thanks
Super
again
cool.
for having me.
Yeah, thanks, guys. We really appreciate it. If you're listening to the show and you enjoyed it, please do share it with a friend. You can feel free to reach out to us. It's marketing@themilvet.org. If you want to give us feedback on the show. We just had an in-person event last week in Austin, which was a ton of fun. We've got in-person events coming up in Philly, DC, New York City. We're going to have one in Park City, Utah. We've got the Military Veterans Startup Conference in San Francisco in February. It's February 5th and 6th. You can find all of these events at themilvet.org/events. Hope to see you guys at an in-person event. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you guys back here next week.